It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon in the small, sleepy town of Brooksville. The sun was shining, birds chirped in the trees, and people went about their daily routines, unaware that something extraordinary was about to unfold. In the distance, a car's engine hummed lazily as it passed through the residential streets. But then, something unexpected caught the attention of a passerby. A large dog, with fur matted from days of wandering, was sitting motionless in the middle of Oakwood Avenue, a usually quiet stretch of road. What was truly strange, though, was what the dog was holding. In its mouth, wrapped in a tattered blanket, was a small baby. The dog's body language didn't show any aggression. It wasn't growling, nor was it barking. It was simply sitting there, watching the world pass by, with the baby carefully nestled in its jaws. At first, no one knew what to make of it. A couple walking their dog slowed to a stop, their eyes widening in disbelief. A car slowed as the driver, a middle-aged man with a furrowed brow, squinted to get a better look. Is that a baby?" he muttered to himself, his voice a mix of confusion and concern. He wasn't the only one. By now, a few more residents had gathered at the edge of the road, their eyes glued to the scene in front of them. Some were frozen, unsure of how to act, while others began to inch closer. The dog remained still, its eyes never leaving the small bundle of life in its mouth. The baby, though perfectly still, appeared unharmed. Its tiny fingers curled slightly in its sleep, and its face, though covered by the worn blanket, looked peaceful. But how had it ended up here, in the middle of the road? Why had the dog, of all creatures, chosen to protect it? "Someone should call 911, a woman finally said, her voice shaking with uncertainty. She fumbled for her phone, hands trembling as she dialed the emergency number. Within moments, she was explaining the strange scene to the dispatcher, detailing the dog, the baby, and the fact that no one knew where the baby had come from. People began to gather more cautiously now, forming a loose circle around the scene. Every few seconds, someone would glance at the dog, unsure of how to approach it. The dog didn't seem to care about the growing crowd. It was as if it were waiting for something, or someone. The air was thick with tension as the crowd exchanged nervous glances. Everyone was thinking the same thing. What on earth was going on? As more people gathered around, the air grew thick with confusion and unease. The once quiet street now felt like the center of a gathering storm. A young man stepped forward, trying to get a closer look at the dog and the baby, but hesitated when the dog growled softly. The sound was low and throaty, but enough to make the crowd recoil, a ripple of nervous energy passing through them. The dog's posture didn't shift, but its eyes remained fixed on the baby in its mouth, as if nothing else mattered. The baby, however, showed no signs of distress. It remained perfectly still, almost as though it was sleeping soundly. "Is it safe to approach?" someone whispered from the back of the crowd, eyes darting nervously between the dog and the baby. A few people began backing away, their instincts telling them to be cautious. The uncertainty was palpable. Was the dog dangerous? Had it harmed the baby? Or was this just a confused animal acting out of protective instinct? No one could say for sure, but the tension in the air was undeniable. The woman who had first called 911 now stood frozen, foam pressed to her ear, trying to stay calm as she relayed the situation to the operator. "It's a large dog, and it's got a baby in its mouth. No one knows where the baby came from. Please hurry." Her voice trembled, and she felt her heart race with every passing second. She could hear the operator's reassurances on the other end, but it did little to quell the growing fear. Cars began to slow down as drivers tried to peer around the dog, their faces twisted with curiosity and concern. One car even honked its horn, trying to nudge the dog aside, but the dog didn't budge. It just sat there, unmoving, with the baby still cradled gently in its mouth. The cars that had stopped to look began honking in frustration, but the dog remained unaffected. It seemed as if the animal knew exactly what it was doing. A man in a suit, who had been walking his dog along the sidewalk, muttered under his breath, "This is too weird." He took a cautious step forward, but stopped when the dog bared its teeth for a brief moment. It wasn't an aggressive snarl, more of a warning. The man backed away quickly, the uneasy feeling in his stomach growing stronger. A few minutes later, a woman, her voice trembling, said, "What if it's someone's dog? What if it belongs to the baby's family?" The idea that the dog might be some sort of protector sparked a flicker of hope among the crowd. Could it be that the dog was simply trying to keep the baby safe? Or was there something more sinister going on? The growing panic was palpable, and time seemed to slow. The baby remained untouched, but the mystery of how the child had ended up in the road, and why the dog was there with it, was becoming more intense by the minute. And still, the dog didn't move. It waited. And so did everyone else. The sirens grew louder as the emergency response teams arrived on the scene, cutting through the tension in the air. A police car screeched to a halt, followed by an animal control truck, its flashing lights casting an eerie glow over the street. The crowd stepped back, some of them visibly relieved, while others remained frozen, uncertain of what would happen next. A tall officer, his uniform crisply pressed, stepped out of the police car, scanning the scene. His gaze landed on the large dog still sitting motionless in the middle of the road. The baby, wrapped in the now dirty blanket, was still held gently in the dog's mouth. For a moment, the officer simply watched the animal, his brow furrowed. He didn't make a move to approach immediately. Instead, he nodded to the animal control officer who had stepped out of the truck beside him. The animal control officer, a middle-aged woman named Lisa, was experienced with aggressive animals, but this was a situation she had never faced before. She approached cautiously, her hand outstretched in a gesture of calm. "Easy boy," she said in a low, soothing voice. The dog didn't react, its eyes still fixed on the baby in its mouth. Lisa, sensing that the situation was delicate, knelt down a few feet away, trying to create space between herself and the crowd, which was now beginning to grow anxious again. The dog's gaze flicked briefly toward Lisa, but it didn't move. The officer took a deep breath, analyzing the situation carefully. It was clear that the dog wasn't trying to harm the baby, but its behavior was strange. Lisa had handled plenty of stray dogs, but a dog with a baby. This was something different. She could sense the animal's protectiveness. It wasn't just guarding the baby from the crowd. It seemed to be waiting for something or someone. "Can you get closer?" The police officer asked Lisa, his voice calm but firm. She nodded, her eyes never leaving the dog. Slowly, she inched closer, her hand still outstretched. As she approached, she could see the baby more clearly now. Its tiny face was peaceful, but there was something unsettling about the situation. The baby didn't seem to be crying, which was unusual for a child left in such a strange circumstance. Was it in shock? Or was it truly unharmed? "Hey there, Max," Lisa said softly, as if trying to create a connection. The dog's ears twitched, but it didn't move. Lisa took another step forward, speaking in a calm, steady tone. "We just want to help." For a moment, everything seemed to hold still. The crowd was silent, holding their breath. The officer watched anxiously, ready to intervene if necessary. Lisa took a deep breath, and with one final reassuring word, gently coaxed the dog to release the baby. The dog, still eyeing her warily, finally dropped the child into Lisa's arms. The crowd collectively exhaled. The baby was safe, but the questions that had been lingering since the moment the dog appeared, where had the baby come from, and why had the dog brought it here, still hung in the air, unanswered. As the baby was gently placed into Lisa's arms, the crowd collectively let out a sigh of relief. The tension that had hung in the air began to lift, but the confusion remained. The baby, despite the odd circumstances, appeared unharmed. Its tiny face was calm, its eyes closed in a peaceful slumber. Lisa cradled the infant carefully, checking for any signs of injury. Her experienced hands quickly confirmed what the others had suspected. There were no obvious injuries, no cuts or bruises. The baby was alive, but there was something strange about the way it had ended up here. The blanket wrapped around the baby was worn, almost threadbare, and caked with dirt. It was clear the baby had been outside for some time, but there was no sign of trauma, no blood, no bruising. In fact, the child seemed remarkably well kept despite the circumstances. The look of pure innocence on its face made the situation even more bewildering. Lisa glanced at the dog, who was still sitting in the road, its eyes fixed on her and the baby in her arms. The dog hadn't moved since it dropped the child into her hands. It didn't bark, didn't growl, just sat there with an almost solemn expression. Max, as the officer had called him, was a mystery in himself. The more Lisa thought about it, the more questions arose. Why had the dog taken the baby in its mouth and carried it to the road? What had prompted Max to act this way? Was it some kind of maternal instinct, or had he been trying to protect the child? "Is it okay?" someone from the crowd asked, their voice barely above a whisper. Lisa nodded, still holding the baby close to her chest. "The baby seems fine," she replied, her voice calm but laced with a hint of disbelief. The more she thought about the situation, the more surreal it seemed. "But we need to find out where it came from." She turned to the police officer, who had been standing back, taking in the scene. He walked over to her, his eyes narrowing with concern. "We'll call in the paramedics and get the baby checked over, but we also need to figure out who the parents are," he said, his tone steady. "I'll start asking around the neighborhood. Someone must know something." Lisa nodded, still cradling the baby carefully. She knew the investigation had just begun, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play here. As the officer walked away to make inquiries, Lisa looked around at the small crowd that had gathered, their faces filled with a mixture of curiosity, concern, and confusion. No one knew who the baby was, where it had come from, or why Max, of all creatures, had become its guardian. It was all so strange, so out of place. But the dog's actions had been clear. He had protected this child, and now it was her job to figure out why. The crowd began to disperse, but Lisa stayed rooted to the spot, her mind racing. What had just happened? And more importantly, what would happen next? The scene was beginning to settle, though the questions remained unanswered. Lisa stood at the edge of the road, cradling the baby carefully, her mind racing. The paramedics had arrived and were now taking over, gently assessing the infant. They confirmed what Lisa had already suspected. The baby was in perfect health. No injuries, no signs of neglect. But the question of where the baby had come from, and why the dog had been there, was still hanging in the air like a thick fog. The police officer who had been working the scene approached Lisa, his face serious. He'd spoken to a few people in the neighborhood, but had turned up nothing substantial. No one knew where the baby had come from. No one had seen any sign of the child's parents. As far as anyone could tell, the baby had appeared out of nowhere. And yet Max, the dog, had acted as though he'd been waiting for the moment to help. "We've got a few people going door to door, asking if anyone's seen anything unusual," the officer said, looking at the dog, who was still sitting in the middle of the road. "But so far, nothing. It's like the baby just appeared. And there's no sign of any other cars or anything that could explain how this happened." Lisa glanced at Max, who was now watching the baby with a quiet intensity. His expression wasn't one of aggression or confusion. It was almost as if he knew he had done exactly what he was supposed to do. He had carried the baby to safety. That much was clear. But why? Why had he acted in such an extraordinary way? Could it be a coincidence? Lisa asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Maybe he just found the baby by chance. The officer shook his head. "I don't know, but it feels like there's more to it. Why would a dog, especially one that's been missing for a while, show up at exactly the right moment with the baby in its mouth? It doesn't add up." Lisa couldn't argue with that. There was something far too deliberate about Max's actions. He had waited in the road, guarding the baby, as if he was waiting for help to arrive. But who had told him what to do? Who had trained him? The questions kept piling up. A woman who had been standing at the edge of the crowd approached, her eyes wide. She had seen the dog earlier, before the chaos had unfolded. "I know this might sound strange," she said, "but I've seen that dog before. It's Max, right? He's been in the neighborhood for a while. But I swear, he's always been different. He's always been so calm around kids, especially babies. I never thought much about it, but now." Her voice trailed off as she looked down at the baby in Lisa's arms. Lisa nodded thoughtfully. "That's what I've been thinking too. There's something about Max, something that makes him different." The officer turned to look at the dog, his eyes narrowing in thought. "Maybe we should start looking into his past. There might be more to this dog than we realize." As the investigation continued, the mystery deepened. The baby was still without answers, but there was something undeniably special about the connection between Max and the infant. Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that the answers were just out of reach, but the bond between the dog and the baby was undeniable. The truth, she knew, was waiting to be uncovered, and as the police worked on the search, one thing was becoming clear. This was no ordinary story. Max's role in it was just beginning to unfold. As the investigation into the mystery deepened, the puzzle pieces slowly began to come together. Max, the dog who had saved the baby, wasn't just any stray. He had a history in the neighborhood. Lisa, the animal control officer, was the first to dig deeper into his past. She began asking around, speaking to residents who had known Max for years. The more she learned, the more remarkable the dog's story became. Max had been a rescue dog. He had come to the neighborhood about 2 years ago, adopted by a kind woman named Margaret. Margaret had been an animal lover, known to take in stray dogs and care for them as her own. Max had been different from other dogs, though. From the moment she adopted him, Margaret noticed that Max had an uncanny sense of gentleness and protection. He would always be found nearby when the children of the neighborhood played outside, watching them with a calm, almost nurturing presence. Neighbors recalled how Max would often sleep at the doorsteps of houses with young children, almost as if he were on guard. He never displayed any signs of aggression. Instead, he had a serene, almost wise demeanor. The children loved him. He would follow them on walks, sit by them while they played, and never once showed fear or hesitation when they would reach out to pet him. Max was always calm, attentive, and protective. Margaret, too, had seen something extraordinary in Max. She would often talk about how he seemed to understand more than other dogs, as if he knew what was going on around him. He had an unusual bond with children, in particular, and Margaret had always felt a deep connection to him. However, a few weeks before the incident with the baby, Max had disappeared. Margaret, frantic with worry, put up flyers and searched the neighborhood for days, but there was no sign of him. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. "I knew something was wrong," Margaret said tearfully when she was contacted by the police. "Max was never one to run away for long. He always came back. But this time, he didn't. I thought maybe something had happened to him." But now, her voice trailed off as she looked at the baby, still wrapped in the tattered blanket. "Could it really be him?" she asked, her voice shaky. The more Margaret spoke about Max, the more the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Lisa, still holding the baby, couldn't help but feel a deep sense of awe. It seemed that Max had always had a special connection to the children of the neighborhood. But why had he disappeared? And why had he appeared now, at this exact moment, with the baby in his mouth? Margaret's eyes widened with realization. "Wait," she said, her voice full of disbelief. "That's not all. Max, he always acted like he was guarding something. Not just the kids, but me. When I was going through a tough time, he never left my side. He protected me in ways I can't explain. And now," her voice caught in her throat. Could it be that Max had somehow known what was about to happen? that he had protected the baby, as he had once protected Margaret. The mystery deepened further with every passing moment. But there was something in the way Margaret spoke about Max that suggested she believed he had done more than just wander back into the neighborhood. It was as if he had returned for a reason that none of them could fully understand yet. Lisa stood silent, reflecting on the words Margaret had shared. Max's journey had been far more than just a series of random events. There was a purpose in his actions, one that would soon come to light. The more Lisa listened to Margaret, the more she felt that the answers to this mystery were just on the horizon. The pieces were slowly aligning, but there was still something elusive about it all. Why had Max returned after disappearing for weeks? And why had he chosen this exact moment, this exact baby, to intervene? There had to be a deeper connection between the dog and the child, one that no one could yet see. As Lisa stood with the baby in her arms, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something special about the baby too. While the baby appeared perfectly fine, its peaceful expression hinted at something more, something inexplicable. There was no sign of trauma or distress. The baby had been left in the middle of the road, but it was unscathed. And yet there was an undeniable bond between the infant and Max, one that no one could explain. Margaret, still standing beside Lisa, seemed deep in thought. "I have to tell you something," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of her words. "A few weeks ago, before Max disappeared, I had a strange feeling. It was like he knew something was going to happen. He was acting differently, almost like he was preparing for something." Lisa looked at Margaret, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean by preparing?" "I don't know exactly," Margaret admitted, "but it felt like he was watching me, protecting me in a way that was more intense than usual. He wouldn't leave my side, and he seemed agitated. I thought it was just me being paranoid, but now I think he was sensing something I couldn't see. Maybe he knew I wasn't supposed to be involved in whatever was coming." The words hung in the air between them, thick with uncertainty. Lisa glanced at Max, who was now lying quietly on the side of the road, his eyes still locked on the baby in her arms. It was as if he was waiting for something, a silent observer in the unfolding drama. Could it be that Max had somehow known that the baby was in danger? Or was there a connection between them that went deeper than anyone could comprehend? Just as Lisa was about to ask Margaret for more details, a voice interrupted the moment. A neighbor who had been quietly listening and stepped forward, holding a small piece of paper in her hand. "I think you need to see this," she said, her face pale. "I found this while walking my dog. It was tucked under a bush near the park." Lisa took the paper from the woman, unfolding it carefully. It was a photo, a faded, grainy picture of a family. A woman holding a baby in her arms, a man standing beside her with a child in tow. The image looked old, maybe a few years at most, but what caught Lisa's attention was the familiar face of the man in the photo. It was the same face that had been on one of the missing person flyers she had seen earlier that day. That's Margaret's husband," Lisa murmured, her voice catching in her throat. "He's been missing for months." Margaret's face went white. What do you mean?" He's been gone for months." Lisa's mind raced. The connections were starting to form, but it didn't make sense. Why would Max have a photo of a man who had been missing for so long? And why had the picture been left near the park? The mystery deepened even further. Margaret's husband, the missing man, and the baby in her arms. Could there be a connection between them all? There was only one way to find out, and the clock was ticking. The answers were closer than ever, but they were also tangled in layers of secrets, some of which would soon be revealed. The discovery of the photo was like a key turning in a lock, and with it, the mystery that had surrounded the baby and Max began to unravel, but not in the way anyone had expected. Lisa's hand shook as she held the photo, her thoughts spinning wildly. The man in the picture was Margaret's missing husband, but what was his connection to the baby? And why had the photo been left near the park? It all pointed to something deeper, something that no one could have predicted. Margaret, pale and trembling, looked from the photo to Lisa and back again. "That's my husband," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But how? How could this be? He's been missing for months, and now—" Lisa gently put a hand on Margaret's shoulder, trying to steady her. "Margaret, I think we're looking at this from the wrong angle. This photo, this baby, and Max, they're all connected. We need to dig deeper. This isn't just coincidence." The crowd that had gathered around them had thinned, but a few people still lingered, watching intently as Lisa continued to piece things together. Her mind raced, but she knew she needed to remain focused. There were too many questions, too many unknowns. The missing husband, the baby's sudden appearance, Max's strange behavior. It all pointed to something that no one could fully understand yet. Lisa turned to Margaret, her voice firm but compassionate. "Margaret, I think the answer lies in your husband's disappearance. There's more to this story than just Max bringing the baby to safety. We need to look into where he went, what he was involved in, and how this baby fits into it all. It's possible your husband wasn't just lost. It's possible he knew something important." Margaret wiped tears from her eyes and nodded slowly. I don't know where he went. He left without a trace, and I've been living with the fear that something horrible happened to him. But now, I'm not so sure." She took a shaky breath. "I think I need to tell you everything. I need to share what I've been keeping secret." With that, Margaret began to recount her story, one that left Lisa reeling with shock. Margaret's husband had been involved in something far more dangerous than anyone had realized. He had been working with a small group of people who were investigating something classified, connected to a large network of underground operations. She didn't know all the details, but she had found some of his notes before he disappeared. In those notes, there had been cryptic references to a child, a savior, and a series of coded messages that didn't make sense at the time. But now, everything started to fit together. The baby wasn't just any baby. It was the key. The baby's existence, the strange connection to Max, and the photo. All of it tied back to her husband's work. Max had been more than just a protector. He had been part of something bigger, a guardian of the child, brought into this web of secrets for a reason. Lisa's head spun as Margaret's words settled in. "So you're saying this baby could be part of something important, something dangerous?" Margaret nodded solemnly. "I don't know what it all means yet, but I think my husband found out something he wasn't supposed to. And this baby might be the key to everything." As the final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, Lisa knew one thing for certain. The mystery wasn't over. It had only just begun. And the answers, no matter how strange or unbelievable, were waiting to be uncovered. The truth behind the baby's arrival, Max's involvement, and Margaret's missing husband was far from simple, but the real story was just beginning to unfold.